selling the war on Gaza through Israeli and Palestinian eyes. But who's winning the social media war and the battle for public support? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. As the conflict between Israel and Hamas intensifies, so too does the battle being waged online. For generations, propaganda has always unfolded alongside warfare, but conflicts now are coming under increased scrutiny through social media. An information war being waged online by journalists, by individuals, and by the Israeli and Hamas media machines. But is it possible to determine who's winning? Well, both sides are relying heavily on social media to get their message across. This was the Twitter page of the military wing of Hamas, the Qassam brigades. It's now been removed, but as you can see, the posts included updates, pictures, and the occasional graphic. Much of it boasts about their supposed military successes or shows evocative pictures of civilians. The Israeli military also tweets, but it's running a much slicker operation. They also use pictures, video, graphics and animations and tweet in a number of languages. Take a look at some of these in English. This one caused some controversy, aimed at a Western audience, depicting bombs raining down on Westminster in London with the tagline, "What would you do?" Other tweets show infographics and videos that give the Israeli view of its attacks on Gaza. But it's not only the government. Israeli newspapers have reported hundreds of university students being used to get Israel's message out. These are students at the Interdisciplinary Center in Jazeera. They're working in what's been described as a Hasbara war room. Now, Hasbara is the Hebrew word commonly used as a euphemism for propaganda. These people post comments on Facebook and Twitter in over 30 languages with the aim of countering anti-Israeli sentiment online. Well, despite Israel's social media campaign, there is some evidence to suggest that it's perhaps losing the information war. Two hashtags have dominated discussion about Israel's offensive. When we began recording today's programme, the hashtag Gaza under attack had been used some 4.3 million times. But compare that to this one, the hashtag Israel under fire, which has only been used 197,000 times. All right, loads to discuss on today's programme. Let's bring in our guests for today. From Jerusalem, we're joined by Mitchell Barak, a pollster, commentator, political communications specialist, and the former media advisor to Israeli President Shimon Peres. Joining us from London, Ben White, researcher and writer for Middle East Monitor and an author and journalist on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And from Johannesburg, we're joined by Mohammed Nanabai, a social media specialist, the former head of online at Al Jazeera English. Gentlemen, welcome to Inside Story. Ben, Mitchell, I'm going to start by putting the same question to the both of you. We'll start with Ben. Who do you think right now is winning the social media war and why?
Well, firstly, I mean, as there's an ongoing massacre, I don't think it's necessarily correct to be talking about winning or losing a battle online, but I think that Israel's propaganda efforts, particularly on social media, are suffering from three familiar problems. Firstly, there's this rather crude approach to influence and outreach, with the emphasis on big numbers in terms of how many people follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Although just after Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, the head of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs digital diplomacy team admitted that there were three kinds of followers of the IDF and Israeli government Facebook pages: those who follow them just to curse at them, those who follow, read and then curse, and those who follow them and don't curse at all. The second problem is that sometimes Israel's propaganda can backfire. So when they tweet images of houses in Gaza, supposedly depicting them as munition storages or where Hamas are hiding weapons, what that is actually saying is that the IDF is not justifying particular specific attacks, but views all civilian houses in Gaza as potential targets, which is further evidence of war crimes. And thirdly, the problem they face is that on the same platform where people can see abundant evidence for war crimes being committed in Gaza, on that platform they're trying to deny that.
Mitchell Barak, is Israel's propaganda campaign backfiring? Is it losing the social media war, however inappropriate that term is?
Well, I'll have to join Ben on that. And we're in a war, and there are no winners or losers in a war, and both sides are suffering, and both people are suffering, and both people have casualties. And, you know, I can tell you as an Israeli to have, you know, 1,400 missiles fired at your country is not a great place to be. And Israel does not want to be invading anywhere. Israel does not want to be bombing anywhere. So first of all, I think there are no winners and losers. I also don't necessarily agree that there are war crimes being perpetrated here. The Israeli Defense Forces, one of the only armies in the world that has the word defense in it. We're not an offensive force. Israel's not interested in being an offensive force. The Israeli army is trying to defend its citizens, stopping the attacks on innocent civilians. When it comes to social media, I don't know if those are the three categories of people who like Israel on Facebook. And the word hasbara doesn't mean propaganda. It comes from the Hebrew word to lehasbir, to explain. And it's really an information operation. And the Israeli government it's not win or lose in social media for the Israeli government, for the IDF. It's getting the truth out. But meaning there's a certain responsibility that nation states and armies take, the Israeli army and the Israeli government takes when they take to Twitter and when they take to Facebook, and it's getting the truth out. It's certainly getting the Israeli perspective out, but it's also giving information to the millions of people around the world that want the information about Israel, that want to make an informed decision and want to advocate.
It's getting the perspective out, but it is some of the material put up on social media by Israel perhaps in any way counterproductive?
Again, the Israeli government and the Israeli army is in a very tough position here because they have to defend the citizens of Israel, all the citizens. Now, there's 8 million citizens in Israel, of which 1 million of them are Israeli Arabs of Palestinian descent. And those Israeli Arabs are full citizens. They serve in the Knesset. We have a democracy where Israeli Arab members of Knesset criticize the government and criticize the operation. So Israel has to defend its citizens. In order to do that, they have to go after a terror organization that seems to be and has admitted to actually being involved in civilian populations. And that's a very, very difficult operation, and a lot of difficult choices and decisions are made. And that's where Israel is. So the Twitter and the Facebook is used by the IDF to, yes, kind of explain why they have to do these things, to kind of explain where the enemy has embedded themselves. But at the end of the day, the IDF, Twitter and Facebook and social media campaign, which is very, very organized this time around, is just trying to get the truth out and to explain Israel's perspective to the millions of supporters of Israel around the world, the millions of people that support justice and freedom, as well as anyone else who wants to make an informed decision and not have propaganda or not have slanted.
All right, let's bring in Mohammed Nanabai in Johannesburg. Mohammed, at the time of Israel's Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009, Twitter was barely 3 years old. Since then, it's become an indispensable tool in the gathering and the disseminating of news. What impact do you think social media is having on the current conflict in Gaza?
Well, Adrian, I actually think, you know, the way you've cast this as, you know, who's winning, I actually think, you know, there's a third winner here. And, you know, I think the Israelis are speaking to themselves when they're posting out their infographics, and Hamas is speaking to their supporters. But there's actually a third line that's actually, that's in effect have won this online narrative. And that's the truth. And that's, we've got journalists on the ground. And suddenly we're seeing that the Israelis can't control the narrative, Hamas can't control the narrative, but we're actually seeing a narrative emerging out of Gaza that's being shaped directly by journalists who are on the ground. You know, there's at least 60 journalists from outside Gaza who are currently inside, so, you know, working with CNN, Sky, Al Jazeera, The Independent, and, you know, the New York Times. And they're actually forming, you know, giving us direct first-hand information on what's going on. Photos, videos, tweets that are coming out as bombs are landing, as attacks are taking place. So what we've actually seen with Twitter and with social media here is that we've suddenly seen that, you know, what's happening on the ground is being reported directly without going through any intermediaries, without going through newspaper editors, but also avoiding the PR and spin masters sitting in, the respective governments.
But is that important, the fact that we read professional journalists on the ground in Gaza supplying this unfiltered, this raw, devoid of the editorial checks and balances that are normally put into their dispatches material, that we're getting it neat, if you like, without the influence of editors and sub-editors? That's important, is it?
I think in this conflict, what you've seen is, you've seen these journalists come in from Western news organizations reporting, and you can see this shift in the media. You can see this throughout, traditionally many news organizations have often given favorable coverage to the Israelis. We've seen, the Israeli spokesman Mark Regev frame a lot of the conflicts that have happened in the past from Kaz led on. But, suddenly now, the journalists from these news organizations are saying, well, that's actually not what's happening. This is what's happened. We were in those buildings where, they were tapped and then the bombs came down, and they're reporting this directly. So we don't have time, to go to the newsroom where perhaps we might be sensitive to how we want to, put this narrative out, and that we're trying to have this Fox objectivity. So I think it's been quite pivotal. And you look at the public reaction throughout the world, reacting to this picture. So, when people look at this on social media, they're not, people are smart. And, when there's spin happening, the public can see it. And they can usually see through, people who are trying to spin them. But when they're looking at journalists on the ground, people they trust, people with an authentic voice, they can look at this and say, well,
okay.
I know this journalist.
Right.
She's reported for the New York Times before, or she's...
Ben White, are you confident that the social media users are able to differentiate between state-sponsored propaganda, political spin, fabricated reports and the truth?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick point, though, as well. On a show where we're discussing propaganda and how effective or not it is, it was rather ironic that the Israeli guest awkwardly shoehorned into his answer a point about the so-called rights that Palestinians enjoy as second-class citizens. But with this point about to what extent social media users are able to gauge and filter information, I think one of the reasons why hashtags like Gaza under attack have done so well is that it's a grassroots effort in comparison to Hasbara and Israeli propaganda initiatives, which, as you've mentioned earlier in the program, are driven to a large extent by Israeli government ministries, by so-called Hasbara war rooms organized at places like Bar-Ilan University and at IDC as well. And people can recognize grassroots efforts compared to more centralized government engineered efforts. And it's been a game changer for sure, as Mohammed was mentioning as well. The ability for people to view images directly from Gaza by Palestinians themselves, often sort of citizen journalists or just residents of Gaza, as well as those international journalists are there. That raw data has changed perceptions, and I think it is also shaping how the mainstream media then responds.
OK. Gentlemen, we'll pause for just a moment to give you some more background here. The Hamas Interior Ministry has issued guidelines to the grassroots effort, as Ben was referring to, the people on the ground there, social media users in the Gaza Strip, on how to report on Israel's offensive. It instructs social media users to play their part in strengthening the home front and in properly conveying information worldwide. The new guidelines also say that anyone killed is to be called an innocent civilian, with the Israeli action described as a cruel attack. A direct counter to what's being reported in Israel, as Al Jazeera's Kim Vinnell in West Jerusalem reports.
In Israel, bulletins lead with military advances and soldier casualties. Pictures of Palestinian suffering rarely make primetime news. A veteran news anchor choking up during coverage of a military funeral. Soldier deaths going to the heart of the Israeli psyche. These men are considered heroes. Even Israelis know the difference in coverage. These cartoons played out on a major channel during a debate about coverage of the Gaza crisis. But Israeli public opinion is, for the most part, one-sided.
The national interest is above everything. We must finish the job there.
Hurts what's happening to the people in Gaza, but the fault is of the Hamas, is that they use them as a shield.
Israeli journalists aren't allowed into Gaza, and the messages the public receives from army officials are carefully constructed. Online, the military posts almost hourly updates that don't mention civilian casualties. Clips uploaded are in line with the official government message that this is an operation against terrorists. But on the ground, the death and destruction appear indiscriminate, and Palestinian civilians are dying.
When there is a situation whereby you're anyhow targeted, and bloodshed, sadly, is anyhow in the air, and the general feeling is that if we don't fight this, then we will die anyhow, except ingloriously and off the battlefield. People say we might as well fight.
If anything, Israelis appear galvanized by soldier deaths, and Israel is warning it will expand the campaign in Gaza until calm is restored to Israel, preparing Israelis and Palestinians for a continuation of this conflict. Kim Vanel, Al Jazeera, West Jerusalem.
Well, with that in mind, Mitchell Barak, it appears that Israel has two different messages here, one for a domestic audience, one for an international audience. I just wonder, as far as its message to the wider world is concerned, whether Israel is trying to counter what they see as perhaps negative media coverage coming out of Gaza. Are they trying to counter a side of the story, perhaps build a narrative that they feel isn't being told?
Israel is certainly trying to build that narrative and certainly trying to explain that narrative. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to the same thing for Israelis. And most Israelis are united on this front. You have to first protect your own citizens before you worry about citizens from another country. Okay? And the first thing is to defend the people of Israel, to defend all 8 million citizens. I appreciate Ben's complimenting my professionalism in putting in that there's 1 million Israeli Arabs that can vote in the Knesset, that can serve in the Knesset, and according to Israeli law, can be elected prime minister of the state of Israel. So I don't see why it's a second-class citizen. We can talk about that another day. But Ben, Israel is defending its civilians, and there is some terrible and horrible suffering going on in Gaza, and there's a lot of innocent civilians that are suffering and being killed and being wounded in Gaza. And unfortunately, I think the Palestinian people in Gaza, they certainly deserve a better leadership than Hamas. They certainly deserve a better leadership and a better future for tomorrow, because if they're relying, unfortunately, on a terrorist organization that's going to bring them to any place where actually Israelis and Palestinians can work together, that's probably not going to happen, and it's very unfortunate. But at the end of the day, the narrative for Israeli internal consumption, which people agree on, is we have to stop the rocket attacks, we have to stop the tunnel infiltrations, and we have to protect the citizens of Israel. In order to do that, it means going on into a war.
All right, Ben White, you talk about this grassroots effort. Is social media giving Palestinians, Gazans in particular, a voice that they perhaps wouldn't otherwise have had?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's been one of the big changes in recent years. You know, if you go back not so long ago, people were dependent for their news on mainstream news sources, whether television or print media, and now that's completely changed, obviously, and that includes websites, and it also includes platforms like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And that is why that in this current massacre that's taking place now, a lot of people are exposed to the kinds of war crimes that Israel is committing. And in fact, the number of estimates of civilian casualties from dependable sources like UN agencies has remained consistent. It's remained around the sort of 70 to 80% mark. Total number of Palestinian dead, which the last time I saw is over 600, is majority civilian. And in terms of Israeli deaths, the vast majority have been soldiers who have been killed once they've invaded the Gaza Strip most recently. And watching the videos, watching the photos, hearing people's first-hand accounts of indiscriminate shelling, of missiles blowing up entire families as they sleep, that's galvanized people around the world. It's also galvanized those Palestinians who've got Israeli citizenship, who have taken to the streets, for example, in Nazareth and Haifa and other places, many of whom have been arrested by the Israeli security forces for exercising their democratic right to protest.
Mohammed Nanabai, we're seeing, social media is allowing us to see this conflict more and more from the Palestinian perspective. We haven't had that before. I wonder whether you think social media is going to have any effect on Western public opinion, especially in the US, where support for Israel remains strong, and the narrative that Israel has the right to defend itself and is right is the accepted mostly unchallenged norm?
Well, I think it already has. I think if you look at those images coming out, yes, on the one hand, the Palestinians are being humanized. And this is amazing to think of this conflict, years ago where you had the message so tightly controlled by the Israelis. And suddenly, there's faces on these kids and these civilians who are being killed. Every day you wake up in the morning and you see pictures tweeted by correspondents from Western news organizations of children who have lost their parents or who have been killed. So this humanizes the face of the Palestinians, and it's starting to change the narrative. A great example of this, because there's always this pull towards equivalence, and to say, well, this side and this side, and try to, put both sides on equal footing with the Israelis and the Palestinians. So, when the 4 boys were killed on the beach in Gaza, this photo was tweeted out. It was put on the internet. The videos went viral. People saw this. And on the same day, journalists were in Israel, posted pictures of a beach in Israel.
Yeah.
And you saw people sunbathing on the beach. So suddenly you saw these 2 pictures in contrast. And you see there isn't equivalence. So when you look at these missiles that fall, that Hamas are shooting into Israel, and you see potholes being created in the ground, and then you see the destruction on the other hand when the Israelis bomb Gaza, these are posted side by side. Yeah. And that, starts changing. And, no matter how battle-hardened you might have been, and no matter what a hardened supporter of Israel you might have been, when you look at these images, you can't stop but think and say, well, this isn't right.
Okay. Mitchell Barak, I know you want to come in on that.
Yeah, first of all, I want to agree with Mohammed and what he said in the beginning, in that, there's the Israeli narrative, there's a Palestinian narrative, and then there's what we see as the truth. Israel is not afraid of telling the truth and letting everyone know what's going on. I mean, Israelis are not trying to cover up anything. The information that we have and has come out, even from Hamas official channels, is that they're using innocent civilians, and they're telling innocent civilians not to leave their homes when Israelis are warning them to leave. And that's a very, very difficult situation. So it is important that the truth gets out and people see it. It becomes a little bit distorted when you're seeing all the time pictures of devastation, and it is very bad. And it is very bad when people suffer, and it is very bad when innocent civilians are wounded and killed. And I think it would have been helpful to have people on the ground tweeting from Syria, let's say. I know, Ben, you refer to this as a massacre of 600 civilians being killed, and every Israeli feels the pain of 600 of those people that are civilians that are killed. What would you call the recent civil war in Syria, where over 150,000 people have been killed between the rebels and Assad?
All right.
And 600,000 people have been wounded. Yeah. Would that be a mega massacre? Would that also be a massacre? And where was the programs for Al Jazeera during that period of time, talking about the 4 to 6 million people that have been displaced from their homes?
Yeah.
My cousin is a medic in the Israeli army that sits on the North Wait and takes care of Syrian casualties and Syrian wounded.
Mitchell,
that come to Israel.
we're running out of time. And look, in our defence, we have a programme, an inside story on Syria each and every week. Ben, I have a feeling this is going to be the last question. I don't want to get into the Syria issue here, but we were talking about the fact that we're seeing this conflict more and more from a Palestinian perspective. Is it the power of social media, do you think, likely to have any impact on the politics of America's relationship with Israel? And what does it say about the power and influence of social media if it doesn't?
Yeah, I think it is having an influence and will continue to do so. I mean, just 2 quick examples. I'm sure a lot of viewers have seen how a number of US-based, in particular, celebrities have tweeted and then subsequently deleted comments sort of in support of or deploring what's happening in Gaza. And I think the thing that's noteworthy there is not that they sort of deleted it afterwards, but the fact that they tweeted it at all. And what that says to me is that the awareness of Israeli war crimes has penetrated and is penetrating the mainstream consciousness in the US to the extent that even a celebrity would think about tweeting it. And a CNN poll that has just come out indicates that only 57% of Americans back Israel's current attack on Gaza. Now, that's a majority. But I say only because for Americans, they're in a country where the government, where Obama, where the Congress backs Israel to the hilt, and where the media displays a lot of bias in favor of Israel. So Ben, that is a discourse shift that is taking place and won't reverse.
Ben, we're out of time. Many thanks indeed. Gentlemen, Mitchell Barak in Jerusalem, Ben White in London. and Mohammed Nanabai in Johannesburg. Thank you very much indeed for taking part in today's programme. Do let us know your thoughts. You can leave your comments on social media, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story on Twitter. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again. Bye for now.